Well, when I first moved in the house in Beverly, I was so happy to be there. It meant so much to me to be living in that community and to be living in a house that was built before the Civil War, because for whatever reason I'm drawn to that period. The events between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War have always had a strong appeal for me personally. It was almost magical to be living in a house that was in Beverly when so much took place in the formulation of that community. And I remember sitting in my backyard, and while the traffic whizzing by was modern-day cars and trucks, in my mind I was sitting along the Staunton Parkersburg Turnpike, and I could visualize, I could see the buggies and the troop movements passing by in front of me, in front of the house, and every time I look at that road, I see the Staunton Parkersburg Turnpike instead of modern day 219 250, and I can see herders or farmers bringing their sheep and their cattle and their pigs along the pike, taking them to market. As I said, I can see the troop movements passing by. I can see the wagons and the horses, and I even have some early photos that show the wagons passing by in front of my house, and one they're weaving to miss a dog that's either asleep or dead and lying in the road. And you can see how the wagon tracks went around this dog in the road. Then, as I travel the road, I can see, while many people are traveling on Route 219 and 250, or particularly 250 from Huttonsville over the mountain to Staunton, for me, I'm still traveling along the Staunton Parkersburg Turnpike, and I have always taken special notice of the houses along the turnpike that were standing at the time the turnpike was still being used as a turnpike, and have thought and read about where the toll houses were, the bridges that at one time were covered bridges and built by local bridge builders. I can visualize climbing up the mountain, climbing up Allegheny Mountain, what it must have been like for people that either rode horses or buggies, or had to walk up that mountain. In the Civil War, there was a lot of movement between Elkwater and Cheat Summit Fort, and the way that people got from one place to the other was from walking. And that mountain presents a challenge even to automobiles, and I can imagine just to the troops that had to walk up that mountain, or to the wagoners that had to drive their wagons both up the mountain and down the mountain, because that must have been a challenge as well, to have had to lean on the brake to get that wagon down the mountain as steep and as long as that grade is. I can also imagine the places where troops were stationed along the way at either Camp Allegheny or Cheat Summit Fort. My grandfather, one of my great-great-grandfathers, was stationed at Cheat Summit Fort. After he left Beverly, he was sent to Cheat Summit Fort, and he spent that winter of 1861 up there. And I've read about the accounts of the terrible weather that people encountered, and how people died. So many troops died just from the hardships of the weather that they had to endure. Having had relatives who crossed that pike, probably on foot, and perhaps injured, I often think about the movement of people along that route, and so I visualize that as I'm driving. What it must have been like for my grandfather to have walked along that route, with a rather severe injury.
Tell me about this road. You were just looking on the map. the Staunton to Parkersburg Turnpike, also known as Route 250.
I just remember, like when I lived in Frank, we used to travel to Staunton different times, and it just seemed a little curvy to me.
Curvy?
Curvy. Where, you know, when you're a child, you have a tendency to get a little sick when you're traveling, I guess. At the same time, I guess it was a lot of fun. We used to go over and visit relatives. As a matter of fact, my grandmother's farm was over in Staunton, Virginia. And years later, we went back to look for it to see where it was. And things have changed a lot, so it was a little difficult to even, to see where you turn off to go to the farm. But I do remember riding the school bus from the farm to school, and it was a lot of fun to do that. Sometimes my grandfather would take us on the wagon out to catch the school bus in the wintertime when it was real cold.
So you were staying with your grandparents near
Staunton, outside of Staunton, and we rode the school bus into Staunton.
And was there much traffic along the road? What did you see? What were people driving?
I didn't actually notice that much traffic. I suppose there was, but there was also like trains that went by that, like the school bus, the highway, and the train, the railroad tracks. And of course, I was like first, second grade, and it was just a lot of fun to be on a big school bus with your friends and having the bus driver to stop at different places to let people off.
What about your grandfather's wagon? Tell me about that wagon.
Well, living on a farm, you traveled a lot by bus, especially to the main highway. And we also had cream that we kept in containers, and my grandparents would take it to the main highway, and a creamery would pick it up. And I can remember just helping to skim off the cream off of the milk and preserving it in the refrigerator until time to put it in the cans to take it to the highway. And we'd get on the wagon and go with our grandparents to help do that. Or just to ride the wagon, because it was a lot of fun as a child to do something like that.
What did it look like?
The wagon, as I recall, it had like sides on it. And I think there was like a seat in the back, on the wagon where you could sit, or you could sit down on the floor of the wagon. And it was pulled by, I think, one of my grandfather's favorite horses. And I just remember the wheels and running over the rocks and that type of thing.
It was pulled by one horse?
As I recall, now we had more than one horse, but it seems to me that we had one that my grandfather used a lot more than the others. The other horses were mainly for working horses, and we used them for pulling hay shocks and that type of thing. I remember one time sitting up on the horse, and my grandfather told me to take him to the watering hole before we went to lunch, and I was sitting up on the horse's neck. And the horse just stood there waiting for me to get back, I think. But I just stayed up on his neck. So when he bent over to drink water, I just went over the horse's head. So my grandfather came and got me and put me back on the horse and explained to me that I am supposed to sit back on the horse. And then when we took him to the barn, instead of ducking, the horse stood there waiting for me, I thought, to bend over so that I could get into the barn, but I just sat there Finally, the horse went in, and I went off the back of the horse because I did not duck. So that's why I say the horse was smarter than I was.
So that was the one that got to pull the wagon.
Mm-hmm. I believe so.
What color was the wagon?
All I remember is the wagon just being a wooden wagon, not any color, like we think of maybe a red wagon or something. It was just, I assume this made out of wood. Probably weather-worn, as we remember old wagons being, but not of any color.
What did it feel like to ride in it?
Well, when you're a child, it's a lot of fun because it bounces you around a lot, and you run over rocks and maybe some little brush or shrubbery in the road, and it was just fun to be on the back of a wagon. And sometimes when the horse would be running along or trotting, the breeze is blowing your hair, and that was fun. Sometimes you'd stand up in the back of the wagon just to see if you could stand up without falling down, but most of the time you would, because you'd run over a rock or something, and you'd fall, in the wagon. So that was a lot of fun.
Just you kids in the back?
Yes.
And where was your grandfather, or who else came?
Well, usually it would just be my grandfather, maybe another family member. They would be setting up, holding the reins. My grandfather would, setting up on the seat, holding the reins.
What did he look like? Did he wear a hat or anything?
He wore a hat. Sometimes I'd go up front and sit with him, beside of him, and want to hold the reins too, just to see if you could, pull on the horse a little bit. But he was a short man, had Indian blood in him. He was real good with animals, and he had worked around veterinarians, so he knew a great deal about how to care for animals.
So you're bouncing along on the road, and you're holding the reins maybe, or he's holding them, and then you arrive.
At the end, get to the main highway and just leave the cans of cream, and the dairy people would pick it up, and then I guess they eventually brought them back. They had tags on them. They would bring them back to the main highway, and then my grandfather would go and get them.
So what would they then haul the cans of cream in?
They were called milk cans. I think if you ever go into an antique shop or something like that, or a place where they have old things, you will probably see an old milk can. They were silver, had handles on them, and a top, and that's where the milk was stored, the cream was stored.
And somebody would come and pick them up, though?
A dairy, people that made butter, like a dairy place, would pick them up in a truck, and they would return them, and then you go back and pick them up. That's basically what I remember, because I was only like 4 or 5 years old at the time.
At the time
when we lived on the farm.
Remember
I think I left the farm when we were, about 7 or 8 years old.
I remember when they built a hard road through there, and they employed some local people and some from outside, and it was a slow pace putting down the first stone base road, and but they got it through there, and they routed the traffic around the back road to Daly that way when they was building a road. It was quite difficult to get through. Now, that was my daddy's career field, although during the World War I, he worked in the machine shops in Elkins. But outside of that, he was a road builder, and he built the first stone base road across Cheat Mountain up there, out from Huntsville. He had a camp up there in the summertime with 300 people lived in tents, and they'd stay up there all summer, and they had their own cooks and supplies and everything, and they'd haul the rocks in, big ones, and they'd break them down a little, then they'd get them with napping hammers and break them up to where they could roll them in. That was the first stone-based road across. That's 250 across there, I guess. And he did that for years. But we went up there, I know, one time on a picnic, a couple times, something like that. Somebody had a car or a truck or a pickup or something or other. Truck. We never had a car at our house. But somebody had one, and we went up there. My daddy never learned to drive. Of course, he always had transportation available. And when they started the public works, he was superintendent over those things, working on the roads. He was superintendent over that during the, to say mid-30s, or then when they started the public works, part of the recovery program of Mr. Roosevelt's. Because, of course, before that, there wasn't much roads.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, there wasn't much doing over it. They had an old, probably some kind of a power-drawn scraper that they run over it or something. But before, when I can remember back to 1926 or 7 along there, they didn't have much roads. There wasn't much roads before that. My brother had an old Buick. I think it was an 1818 model. A touring car. I believe it was an 1818 model. And then as the kids got older, they all got cars, and which I did later, but a family car, we never had a family car. There, my daddy never learned to drive.
I remember when they first started this, put this road through here. They used to first put this road through here. From Bartow down through Durham here they put great big rocks in. Business was slow. The guys contract to nap them rocks. They nap them rocks. That's the reason why the foundation on this road from here to Bartow stayed good. You had very little left to do to it. Because it's all napped rock. So they just nap them with a hammer. Up, and then see.
Who did that work?
Well, business was slow then. Things were slow, and people contract. You could contract 50 feet of rock at a time. They stake you off whatever amount you wanted. And you nap them, you get so much for that.
So much a foot?
Yeah. My brother and them, they used to do it. They'd give them because the Tanya wasn't working full time then. Maybe working about 2 days, 3 days a week. And they'd get contracted napping rocks. They used to nap them rocks, and then they'd put the hard top, the black top down on it again. That was in the 50s.
What was that like then, having paved roads?
Oh, this is a whole lot better. Dirt roads. See, you used to have dirt roads all up through here. Oh, it used to be, it was all, dirt road. It was slow going. If you were in the car, you had to, back at that time, they had what you call Model T, they didn't travel very fast. But you had to go up several mountains, Allegheny and Monterey, and you had about 5 mountains. Back Creek, called Back Creek, and High Town Mountain, and and Allegheny Mountain. And then slow, you had Model T, you had low gear up mountain, and it wasn't too bad then. But you come down the mountain was all right. But you had to stop and get water and put in a car. Or you'd get hot climbing a mountain, so they had places there where most of the time where you stop and had to put water in the radiator before you go on up. In the summertime, the road was dusty, real dusty roads. Couldn't make too much time on account of it was just pretty steep and crooked. You pass horses now and then, people wagging and things like that. But it wasn't too much traffic on the road then. Now and then you meet a car, nothing like it is now. My dad and my uncles, they used to haul supplies from Staunton to Beverly through the old Turnpike, Parkersburg and Staunton Turnpike. They used to wagon out. I think they'd go over. I think he told me it'd take them about a week, go over from Staunton to Beverly, back by the horses. They'd have take them about a week to make the trip. I think you had about 2 or 3 places they stopped at, sort of camp or rest the horses and things. That was mostly on Back Creek Mountain. That's right out of Monterey. Up on Allegheny they stopped, I think. Because that's a pretty hard pull for horses. He was, when they start wagging from Staunton to Beverly, my dad he wasn't too old then. He was around about, he'd been 14, 15 years old when he started with them. I don't know exactly what he's hauling, but he's hauling supplies but I guess a little bit of everything. I guess things they couldn't get around close, they hauled from Staunton. Like food supplies and stuff like that.
Did they buy and sell on the way any? Were they peddlers?
No, they was working for another fella. They might drop some off, some places. Like maybe back, I imagine at Hightown, the store there, they'd probably bring things over for him. I don't know was anything they brought was stopped in Durham or not. I don't know for sure.
Did your dad talk about any particular adventures along the road that he had?
No, not too much. Only thing he said when he's hauling supplies and things like that, man that they worked for he'd always let one of my uncles or something to carry the money, and in case they get held up something, they wouldn't think. I guess they'd think about them having the money. So he had one of them to carry the money. But he never did say anything about anybody hijacking them or anything like that, or holding them up or anything.
Well, I remember Elkins, of course, when I was small, and there where the high school is, the old high school is, that was all field. All of that was field. And we had a cow, and the cows, others had cows, and they kept their cows in that field. And it went to the river. So that was part of South Elkins. Well, the town, of course, was altogether different. Beautiful trees along the streets and pretty homes. They were well kept. And then the road up the valley, of course, was a dirt road. And I remember that. Going to Huntsville to get chestnuts on a dirt road. Oh, we love chestnuts to eat. Yes. So usually Dad had Sundays off, and that's when we went chestnut hunting, picking chestnut. And there was chestnuts along the river, too, there near my home and near the pasture. So we would go up there and get chestnuts. Well, at one time, Dad had the largest car in Elkins. And one doctor that lived close by said that he knew who it was because he could see all the heads sticking out the window. But it was a Studebaker, a large Studebaker. And it had we called them monkey seats that pulled out of the back of the front seats. And of course you had more room then. You had 3 seats. So that was kind we had. It was very interesting. And then we traveled quite a bit when Dad could take off in the summertime. And it was a car that when it rained, you had to stop and put on the side curtains, as we called it. And we all liked to help with that.
What was the traffic like?
Not much. We didn't want too much traffic because at that time there was too much dust. But there was very little traffic. Not many people had cars.
Did you meet buggies or horses or?
No, not at that time. No. I remember going over to Upshur County. I remember that it was all mountain. That's the only, and I didn't like that. That's about the, and I was afraid that Dad wouldn't know his way back.
I remember when the road was a dirt road, and it would get real muddy and deep ruts in it out here in front when it rained. And it was that way all the way up to Valley Head. And we had ponies when we lived in Elkins, and we would bring the pony cart up, and sometimes we had trouble with the ruts in the road and being so muddy. And my uncle had one of the first Model T Fords, and one time he was going to Elkins, and there was a woman who lived here in Beverly that worked in Elkins for different people. And she was walking along down here someplace on her way, and he drove up to her and stopped and said, "Jane, you want to ride?" And she said, "No, thank you, I'm in a hurry."
That says it all, doesn't it?
Well, it was. That's how bad it got, the road when it was wet and muddy. And I guess it was raining at that time, and she said, "No, thank you, I'm in a hurry." He had a Model A Ford at that time. And
What year would that have been?
would have been in the 20s or early 30s. But I remember the names of the people that put in the ditches and the culverts and the bridges were Battershield and Good, and there was a Mr. Wilkerson who was one of the supervisors, and it seems to me that one of them's name was Lundgren, but I can't be positive.
What else was going up and down the road besides?
Well, there were horses and and ponies and Model A Fords, and you knew every time anybody got a car, and you knew who had a car and who the car belonged to. I knew everybody in the valley and would stand out here on the corner and bum a ride whenever I wanted to, and people were real good about taking me wherever I wanted to go. when I really knew anything about the road, it was still a dirt road, and we used to drive our pony cart from Elkins to Huttonsville, and
Was it a two-wheeled cart or a four-wheeled cart?
it was a four-wheel cart. And we'd also drive it down on Laurel Mountain to Billington practically every Sunday.
Did you ever go across the Rich Mountain in the pony cart?
I don't recall going across Rich Mountain too much.
Now you said that as a younger child, you knew everybody whose car it was. Everybody.
Yeah, you knew everybody that went by because there wasn't any more going by than one or two an hour,
Yeah.
if that many.
Was there any through traffic? Would people be traveling all the way from Virginia across to Parkersburg?
Oh, yes.
So you wouldn't have known everybody then?
Well, no, not everybody, but you knew everybody in the valley. We knew when they got a car and what kind of a car they had, and you'd know when they were coming and going. I just knew everybody from probably Valley Head all the way down, and I was related to a lot of them.
What else did you see on the road? Did you see people moving livestock?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, they used to come through here with sheep or cattle, and they had dogs that helped them drive them, you know. And they would come usually a couple of times a year, taking them to the mountain places for grazing in the summertime, and then bringing them down to the valley in the wintertime.
Was there a stock market then where it is now?
Yes, I think so. You mean over by the Oddfellows' home?
Yeah.
Yes.
So they might be driving?
Yeah, but they wouldn't be driving too many at a time, but I'm talking about a good many being driven to pasture. Sheep and cattle, both.
What about hogs or geese or?
Don't recall hogs. We had, everybody had hogs.
If I were driving from Staunton to Parkersburg in the early 1920s and I came through here, where could I have found lodging? Were there places?
There was a hotel down here about where the Beverly